Hey there, and welcome back to my new player guide series focused on the DLC in particular. These are, as ever, 20-minute crash course guides specifically targeted at new players trying the DLC for the first time and looking for tips. These could be folks joining us with the Nintendo Switch launch. Welcome aboard if so. These could also be folks that have played the game before and are just picking up the DLC for the first time and experiencing all the changes therein. My goal here is to focus on important general topics in reduced detail as opposed to the super comprehensive guides spanning multiple hours that I was making earlier for advanced players. I do think advanced players will benefit from this as well, just from a quick perspective. It's a nice brief catch up no matter what. In this particular guide, we're going to be looking at melting in the DLC to continue our clan review series. Melting, they are here. So before I get into that too far, though, as a reminder, leave a comment with your ideas for other guides you'd like me to make. You can like the video and subscribe if you want to see more. That stuff really does help. That's enough here. All right, let's dig into what we're working with here. So I want to start with some opening remarks before I get into too many strategies. You've heard me talk up to now about the worst clan and the middle of the road clans, and now you're about to hear me talk about the absolute best clan. And whether or not people in the general community will agree with me on this depends a lot on their experience level, I think. Because melting is tough to play, but extremely, extremely powerful. I basically look, and if I see melting in my clan combos, I'm very confident I win immediately from ring 1 regardless of the start. And that's pretty powerful thing to say, honestly. That means a lot if I'm saying that. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I'm not going to dig too far in right now. I'm going to give you gradual details as to why they're so good in the DLC over time in this video. But just to start you off a little bit, some of their worst units did become their best and most consistent units in the DLC. And we'll dig into all the rest afterwards. So, as always with these videos, I will cover the new unit that came out with the DLC. Psych, it's not a unit. What? I know. How weird is that? So wait, why did Melting get a spell and not a unit? Well, the reason and the backstory here, if you're interested, is that Melting has always had 3 rare banner units: Bounty Stalker, Legion of Wax, and Big Sludge, even pre-DLC. But Bounty Stalker was in a really weird place. It was jammed into the non-unit packs as a banner unit. So you would see it in the same packs that you'd run into something like Devourer of Death. Very bizarre. It was treated like a token when it wasn't. This hurt Bounty Stalker's availability in a huge way because you would only see it after you've committed to your line. You would never see it in a banner. And sometimes you would see it so late in something like Ring 6 that it did not make any sense. So obviously this helps Melting a lot in the DLC where it became an actual banner unit. And so what Shiny Shoe did is they added the 3rd banner unit to all 5 of the other clans and introduced instead a spell in Melting to create more consistency overall. This was a really good change, by the way. It means your chances of seeing a really good rare card are the same regardless of clan, which is awesome news. And so that's why we get this card, Hallowed Halls. It is a spell that is 2 Ember and it reads the following: kill friendly units, obviously on the floor. Reform random units to this floor until it exceeds its capacity. So that little circle, that yellow circle there, is representing the pips that are available on the floor. So not only does this reform multiple units, mind you, theoretically everything in your discard, in your consume pile rather, but it overflows the floor, so you can actually overstack as a result of this, which is extremely powerful. A very good strategy here is if you can't normally overstack, you would let a unit die on the bottom floor, and then you would just reform it in the Hallowed Halls pool to the middle floor. And it might be curious to see what does this thing actually do, but essentially it just reforms whatever the heck is there, and it kills everything first. So your density of good cards that you want to put in your reform pool matter. You can't be having train stewards or dregs at that point. You want to kill those, or just at least not play them. And this is definitely a card that is one of the reasons why Melting feels so much better in the DLC. The clan has always felt like it needed one more reform card. If you'd ever asked me prior to the DLC about it, I was always saying it needs one more because it just lacks the consistency to see enough reform when you need it. And getting it on a rare card is actually really important because there are only so many rare cards in a clan. I believe it's 8. Before I say something stupid, let me just check that real quick. It's what? 6 plus 2 token units? 1, 2? Yeah, it is 8 per clan. So, based on that, you have 8 hits, and you see 3 of them. Now, obviously, in these rare packs, you're pulling from 2 different clans, right? So, your secondary and your primary. So, you really have 16 cards. But still, 3 out of 16 to see a reform card is actually pretty darn good. You're pretty likely over the course of a run to see something that says reform now, whether it be from a rare pack or elsewise. So, that's good. That consistency helps a lot. Additionally, it turns out this card is just ridiculously good in general. Reforming your entire floor, it's basically a strategy unto itself. It does have some nuances, but the ability to just put -2, so a value stone, and hold over in this thing and then dupe it twice is pretty incredible, right? You can just scale your whole floor to infinity and beyond this way, and it just feels really good overall. It can, based on that strategy alone, if you hit the right upgrades for it, or if you at least see something that works with it, it can win you the game on its own. Even if you miss holdover, you can always do -2 in spell chain, and then just dupe the thing 2 times, and then just play 6 of them, thin your deck down, and it works basically the same. So it's also, of course, particularly strong with all the things we'll talk about in a little bit that make reform strategies stronger, things like resin block and so forth. I'm not going to go into all the details here because we'll cover it, don't worry. But suffice it to say, the clan has the tools to make this card crazy. So, love to see it. This is a huge improvement to the clan just with this becoming available. So, yeah, now I want to talk a little bit about melting strategies in the DLC, as you might expect from this video. But before I get too far in this, I want to just talk generally about melting. Why is melting so much better in the DLC than in the base game? What changed? Because I think generally speaking, people felt that melting was pretty weak in the base game. And there's a good reason for that. But so let's address it by hitting on what makes them so strong now. And we're not going to hit on all the main strategies right out of the gate, but I am going to talk about this because I think it matters, and I want you to understand why the big jump. The first thing that matters is infusions. There are now infusions as a whole mechanic in the DLC, and the clan gets so much value out of this. Tombs give their whole value as infusions, right? So you can just infuse tombs on each other and do great. You have the ability to add a lot of really good stuff here to other units. And let me just pull up my favorite when I look at this. Where is he? Legion of Wax. So the way Legion of Wax is upgrades pass down to lower tiers when they break up, which means that you technically get the main unit, the 2 splits, and then the 4 further splits for a grand total of 7 instances of your infusion. And just imagine all the synergies with Harvest or Extinguish in this clan, and you can see that Legion of Wax, as an example, is a unit that makes infusions go crazy. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but basically this dude makes every strategy better, right? You can put it into any of the other strategies we talk about in a little bit, and it just makes it stronger, period. So that's a thing. Another one I want to talk about is actually right here, Paraffin Enforcer. This is a good example of a unit. It likes getting infusions. I think this unit on its own with no infusions available, so turn off pack charts entirely, this unit is bad. And there's a lot of reasons for it. The main thing is that it's hard to get enough burnout on him that he's self-scaling. And furthermore, you can't pass his ability onto a better unit like a Draft, as we will talk about in a bit for the DLC strategies. So this dude kind of gets stuck on the floor and feels really terrible. I think it went from being the worst unit in the clan to being maybe the best unit in the clan, honestly, in the DLC, just because of the way the clan interacts with DLC mechanics and the introduction of its infusion, which not only passes on its whole ability, but also gives Burnout too, which is excellent. And in general, you're going to notice that this clan has excellent infusions, just offensive scaling, defensive scaling, utility, really powerful. You just straight up get endless out of Votivary, which is awesome because now Votivary is an excellent augmentation to your tombs. If you miss at shops, you have Draft, which has one of the most accessible and usable multi-strike infusions in game, given the clan. The Burnout one is supposed to be a downside. For many units in Melting, this is actually a pure upside. And so you're not only getting the upside of Burnout 1, you're getting the upside of multi-strike. So this just goes crazy. It's also a common, which is awesome. It means you see it in the first two rings if you're going to see it at all. So you know if you're going to have it in your run very early. And you can plan around that. There's also, there were a lot of buffs to their lesser used units in the DLC as well. The big winner here, Lady of the House. Look at the stat line. It's basically Demon Fiend, except it costs 1 Ember and it burns out in 3 turns. And arguably the burnout is an advantage in a lot of runs. So this thing being a huge, excellent stat stick out of the gate is so good. And there were a couple others as well, but none that I think really warrant too much discussion. Some small things here and there, like HP buffs and so forth. But regardless, every unit in this clan has value in various strategies, and as a result, there are basically no bad hits. You can get hits that are maybe awkward for your run. For instance, you have Harvest Rector and you don't see anything that really plays nice with it. Fine. Paraffin Thug with Harvest Rector, kind of strange, right? But you may not find the obvious choice that you want. A Lady of the Reformed with a non-burnout plan, for instance, is kind of awkward. But regardless of the awkwardness of some lines, you will see units that are good, objectively so, and you can capitalize on that. This is coupled with the fact that all of their rare units are nuts. Some of the best in clan. Bounty Stalker is incredible. Big Sludge, win the game with the Harvest line. Legion of Wax, I already talked about. He's crazy. We'll hit on where these things make sense in their lines later, but basically they are nuts. Love to see them. And yeah, the last thing I want to hit on is Bounty Stalker entering into the banner unit pool and Hallowed Halls being added completely upended the value add from their banners and their rare drafts. And you now love melting banners because just see a rare unit win the game, or the ability to just see a Bounty Stalker on a Ring 1 unit draft is crazy. So they're awesome. That is a huge element of why I think they're so good. It's just overall they handle their stuff well. I talked a lot there. I do want to hit on their individual strategies now. So if I back out here and I type in Burnout, I want to look at all of these units here because these are excellent. Burnout is a very important classic strategy in the DLC. The idea here is everything on your floor has Burnout. You probably have Burnout Rector supporting it, which is awesome. You have Lady of the Reformed in the front as a tank and also as a Burnout extender. You have spells that are your commons that augment it. Hallowed Drippings, Purifying Cleanse, Wicklash. I love taking these cards. You've got a buffed Wax and Spike that actually applies Burnout 4, which is usable in Burnout lines. You have Draft. You have the ability to put Paraffin Enforcer into a Draft, which essentially makes Paraffin Enforcer a multi-striking one-space unit. Be mindful of the draw priority going away on this, though. But ridiculously strong. This line normally scales, Paraffin Enforcer is the obvious choice, but things like Wicklash do it as well. You can get there with Wax and Spike. Additionally, you can just use Reform. Oh no, my dude burned out. Maybe you send your dude to death every turn and it's fine, and you just reform him. Plays nice with Hallowed Halls if you're not using Rage or any of the status buffs. And also, it loves everything from your secondary clans because it hits so many times thanks to Draft and just fitting a lot of things on the floor. Even Dregs are good here because they are one space units that take buffs very well. And you can play imps and all sorts of nonsense with them. So this line is excellent. It's the classic. I think it's the one that makes the most sense. The hardest part about it is making sure your units don't die. So you're looking for reform density on these reform extenders, and you want to make sure you have enough of them. Lady helps a lot to kind of clean that up. Maybe you don't see her though, and you solve it another way. So fair enough. The next strategy I want to hit on, I already touched on a little bit there, and it is the reform strategy. So if we talk a little bit about reform, it's like Endless, but with extra steps. If you want to achieve this as a main line, you need sharp scaling on your reforms. So Wicked Blaze is a good example of this. You get a plus 10 on that. We already talked about Hallowed Halls. You just cast this like 6 times a turn, and that's plus 30 attack. That's pretty good. But if you're relying on the plus 5 from a normal reform on your unit, it's going to be too slow. So you want something like Resin Block, Dark Calling Rector, the Wicked Blaze I already talked about, Penitent Remains, Kin Host Carapace Infusion from Wormkin, you name it. You could do this with anything. You just have to be careful because when your units die and come back, they lose their status effects, so things like Rage are not a good solution here. So you can get there with this. The normal way that I personally play this is with Dark Calling Rector. So sure, it's a good obvious choice, I think. It kind of forces you down that path. But you can do it just by seeing an early Hallowed Halls. You can also do it by leaning into a -2 hold over Wicked Blaze. Maybe you start with Resin Block, etc. It's very powerful. And it's worth noting that this line plays really nicely with Bounty Stalker, because this thing wants to die a ton, so you just send this thing to its death on lower floors, constantly reform it back, and this thing will end up doing something like 700 damage at a minimum by the end of the run, which, as you might imagine, is just a victory on its own. This unit in general is pretty nuts. You can essentially substitute Endless for the reform in any case, and that's fine, but I do want to mention it as part of the reform strategy because it plays really nicely with it, I think. So, the only trick to this unit, of course, is making sure it has enough relentless turns to actually kill a boss. So in the end, you want to stick it behind your lady, your rector, whatever, so that it actually can 1v1 the boss comfortably. So, that's about as much as I need to say on Reform. Moving on, I want to hit on Harvest next. It is a lighter strategy, and I say that because there aren't a ton of units that actually do this. The main lines you're looking for, and for reference, I consider this slightly weaker than the others we talked about thus far because it's slower. It is trusted, however, and it totally wins. You're essentially looking for Wickless Baron or Big Sledge, these two dudes right here. They have the offensive scaling you need in order to win with this. You also really want to see tombs with this. So let me pull up some tombs for you real quick. The main one you're looking for, Remnant Host. It is one unit that dies and gives you 3 deaths, which is really strong. If you see a Waxer Snuffer, it goes up to 5. Pretty crazy. You have Molten Encasement and Entombed Explosive, both of which are excellent units on their own and augment these harvest waves, these harvest floors rather, considerably. So I also am obliged to at least mention that Harvest Rector exists. It is a line that scales with Harvest, and it's good. And it basically 1v1s the Divinity from full HP, so it's pretty strong, you might imagine. But it's really slow at killing waves, which is usually where this line struggles at all. So my normal opinion here is if you have something like a Molten Encasement or a Remnant Host with your Wickless Baron, you can notionally scale HP or survivability enough without Rector on the floor, and it's better to have more multi-striking Barons than to toss in Rector, who scales too slowly for that. You could, of course, send Rector on a lower floor and it's fine. So don't get stuck in the line of thinking you have to have Rector on that floor. That's the most important thing there. So, some other noteworthy things here, I'll hit on them later. Wickless Tycoon is Harvest, but it's more about making money than playing into the Harvest strategy, in my opinion. And we don't use Devourer of Death for its Harvest ability. We use it for its Infusion, which is excellent. It blows things up. I just love putting that Infusion into random stuff. Very good. So the unit's great, but not for the card text, as you might expect. Last thing I'll mention, though, be prepared and have a solution for the harvest waves on the Divinity. They will roll you. It's very easy to have a super strong harvest line, get to the Divinity on that wave, and then surprise Pikachu face when they obliterate your pyre with plus 200 armor and they just walk right by you. So have plans. Spells are a good example, something that kills them. You can split up the waves, movement abilities, rooting, stuff like that. You want to think about that a lot. And if you can kill them all on the floor with Harvest, even better. But, you probably won't. Now, I do want to talk about another strategy. And I'm actually going to jump over here to the champions. I'm going to go a little out of order here because I need to hit on Little Fade. And Little Fade is weird because she is unto herself so unique compared to the rest of Melting. and also extremely strong that she deserves to be mentioned as a winning line here because she has some unique lines that are worth preparing yourself for and knowing how to play. We'll talk about her more in depth in a minute, but let's at least focus on what her winning lines look like on two of her paths. We're not going to touch on Eternal Flame here because it plays very much like a normal champion. With Firelight, very powerful line. You basically want to have lots of hits on your floor with tiny units. Obviously, this means Draft is very good, but literally anything with multi-strike will do. Classic lines are things like Hellhorned Warrior from Hellhorned or Animus of Will. You could even do it with Sweepers, right? That's kind of like a multi-strike. You just treat it as multi-striking every single unit. You use Fade for her scaling, and then you have the other things just slam from behind. So obviously, big floors matter, so space helps a lot. You love having space relics, anything that can benefit that. You also want consistent access to Reform or Endless for Fade so that you can keep playing her and keep getting her killed. It matters. The last thing I'll mention with her lines, you always want health on the unit right behind her because that thing's going to get punched a lot. And you notionally don't want your floors to get wiped out all the time, so having a lot of HP on that thing's pretty good. Fade scaling is so strong that I think you could even win with a multi-strike to Lady of the Reform that has absolutely no offensive presence whatsoever and just extends Burnout. You just have 3 of those on the floor behind Firelight, and you actually win that way, so kind of hilarious. The other one I want to hit on is Little Icarus. This is a weird one. It wants a huge HP pool and generally wants some random decent unit on top floor to clean up anything that it leaks, like a heavy. And reforming her repeatedly, though, is a little tricky to scale her HP. It makes you beholden to reform density, generally slows your lines down, and it can be a bit concerning. That said, if you have the right support for it, it goes out of control and it solos your run. I generally recommend taking this in clan combos with big armor or plus HP, at least with some kind of a complementary start. Healing obviously helps. You give her a little bit of health, you maybe extend her burnout, and you just give her a lot of life and healing, and it can kind of get there as well. So, Awoken's a good combo there. And yeah, the only other worthwhile thing here is I would never take it with Stygian. It's decent and good with Hellhorned, Awoken, and Wormkin. And Umbra it's a mixed bag because this ability can work with Damage Shield, but in my opinion, it only actually works if you have either a ton of morsel density in the start. So, like, I'm talking Grovel, maybe a packed morsels in there, or you have a starting Prismal Dust. Shade Splitters alone will not be enough scaling to save her, and in fact, you'll get dragged down later on by how bad Umbra is. So, fair enough. She's a winning line. It's a winning strategy, so we talk about her here. I next want to hit on making money. We love dollars. These are a little harder to search for, so let's pull them up here. Basically, Paraffin Thug, Wickless Tycoon. You can make a ton of money in this clan. There's also the infusions on these units, which add more dollars, and you have Memorial Fund over here in Relics. I'm not going to click to it because I'll have to come back, but basically, a lot of ways of turning your run into money making. And I want to hit on at least some generic relics that matter, so I'll jump over there real quick. There are a couple that are big, so let me find Memorial Fund for you real quick. There it is, gain 5 gold when a friendly unit dies. Turns out doing that with Harvest, really strong. You also, of course, have, where is it? Golden Vault, which is straight up a gold winning relic if you have enough gold farming to take advantage of it. I don't usually recommend taking it early. Take it later when you have a good confidence that you won't leak too terribly much. Taking it early leads you to skipping trials and other important things, which tend to be really bad. It sets you behind a lot more than it puts you ahead, unless you're very confident. On the opposite end, however, there is rationing scales. I generally think this is pretty terrible because I value Pyre HP a lot in consistency. Sometimes you don't know what your draw order is going to be, and oh no, I take 4 hits from the Inquisitor, the first mini-boss, and dang, I would die if I was relying on rationing scales. It does play nicely with Golden Vault. They work well together. You get gold. It doesn't matter what your health is because gold is becoming your survivability, and this also powers you up early. In that case, it's pretty decent, and it can be good early game because it represents a lot of healing. Sometimes I will take it if I feel like my start is abysmal and I just need to be able to soak with Pyre HP. Fair enough. Money in general, though, is really strong. Now, looking at our banner units next, I want to hit on the ones I haven't talked about. I've kind of notionally clicked on all of them at least. Lady of the House, good burnout unit support, good for fade, good for reform lines, good for just being a vessel for rage from Paraffin Enforcer. Got buffed, feels good. We already hit on Lady of the Reformed. Paraffin Enforcer we hit on. Dude's nuts. Love having it. We talked about the money makers and we talked about Baron. So actually, you know what? We've talked about them all. And I've even hit on all of the rare units as well. So there's not much else to say on this one. Cool. Their banner units, turns out they're all great in some line or another. The only time it's bad is, like I said earlier, when you draft them or have them in the wrong lines. Lady of the Reformed in a Harvest line. Whoops, that doesn't make sense, etc., etc. So then I guess we'll just jump right into the relics. We've hit on a few of them, but in general, they're pretty average. Usually, my opinion about melting relics is that you need a specific one or two, and they're high rolls, and the other ones are kind of whatever. But most of them are pretty solid in general. Combustible wax, grant plus 3 stacks of burnout each time it is applied. This is awesome for any burnout line. It just makes burnout a non-issue. Turns something like Wicklash into burnout 5. I generally really love this. The only time I'll skip this is if 1, I don't do anything with burnout, or 2, I'm relying on the burnout 1 shop upgrade to kill imps or tombs, because it would make it burnout 4, and then it kind of defeats the purpose. So just be mindful. Encased Ember, it's Ember, right? It's 5 Ember when a tomb unit dies. Sometimes this is really good, and sometimes it does nothing. I like it because it's notionally consistent enough as long as you have an endless tomb or something. It kind of just solves Ember for your run, which is always good. And yeah, not much else to say on that. We have Exploding Candle. This used to be much better before the DLC. 5 damage isn't that great, but it still's fine. It'll clear up the normal waves pretty early on in the game. I like taking it. It cleans up early trials. Big fan of that. Fade's first blade is slow slow rage scaling when you lose stacks of burnout. Worth noting the fun interaction here with Wickless recruitment. When you remove all of the stacks of burnout from a unit, they gain all of that multiplier rage. I've actually had some fun runs where this is a decent scaling plan. It's okay. I don't think it's great, but it is enough to get you out of the early and mid games and can augment your late game strategy pretty well. Flicker's Liquor. You play a bunch of units in this clan. Turns out making your entire hand free is pretty good. Solve Ember. Melting Spout. Probably the worst relic in the clan for sure. It's good giving your burnout 1 to tombs if they don't already have burnout 1. The 30 health can be awkward because sometimes you actually want them to die before your units attack as opposed to burning out because, well, you want to benefit from harvest, so fair enough. I skip this one more often than not, but it can be okay. We've hit on Memorial Fund. Mold Braces is kind of pointless. Worth noting, this actually adds an extinguish ability to your units, which is kind of fun. It means you give armor. It's okay, sustain. I don't think it's great, though. Resin Block is nuts in any line where units are dying and coming back. Votive Key just straight up solves Endless for your units. Be careful with this, though. You can get into situations where you're putting Endless on a Dreg or something, and then it's stealing your draws that are really important. So just be mindful. It's really strong, but it can betray you. And then, of course, we all love a good double ability. Trigger, Relic, Waxer Snuffer. If you have anything that says Extinguish in your run, clicking this wins you the game, basically, is my general opinion. So as you can see, pretty good relics all around. I usually like looking at them. Not the strongest in the game, but still lots of good hits for lots of different builds. You can, of course, run into builds where you're like, aha, Resin Block. It's a great relic, but it does nothing for my run. So their lines are a little bit polarizing in that respect. They don't cross over quite as well as some of the other clans do. So fair enough. I do want to jump into champions next. I realize we're getting a little long in the tooth for this video, so I won't take up too much more of your time. Rector, in general, I think is a solid top-of-the-line champion, but I think he is tricky and unpopular, generally because he either burns out with the burnout line here when you're not planning around it, and that could betray you and get you killed. The accumulator harvest line can scale too slowly and sometimes just not get there for you, especially if you rely on it and turns out it doesn't work or get you there, have enough hits. And then Dark Calling, which is really, really strong, but it basically requires a Mensa scholarship in order to play, and is the hardest single line to play and navigate in game right now. So, not for beginners. You try this, you go, wow, this is cool, and then you die on Daedalus because, oh no, your entire floor burned out, and you have no idea how to actually navigate the combat. Watch some videos on YouTube if you're going to play Dark Calling. Trust me, it's pretty brutal. So, also worth noting, dregs are excellent for Rector himself, but generally kind of awkward for your as a secondary. Fair enough, it's fine. I think Rector is excellent, top of the line, definitely top 5 champions in game in my opinion, but can be slightly awkward if you're not comfortable with it. Jumping over to Fade, we already talked about Firelight and Icarus. They are crazy strong in their own respect. Icarus is probably the weakest line, which doesn't mean it's bad. It's actually still completely game winning, but compared to the other lines, I still think it's the weakest. I will dig into Eternal Flame since we haven't touched on it. It is the most straightforward line of Fade. It does the most obvious things, and it is straightforward. You play it, it dies, it comes back, it hits, it dies again. Eventually, when you elevator it up on your bosses as they rise up. If she doesn't kill them on the lower floors, you stick it behind a train steward or your tank on the top floor, and you destroy and demolish. Pretty good. It's nice because it's a jumpy around little Fade that plays well with basically any other strategy. You can have anything on your top floor doing whatever, and then Fade is, oh, also here, killing units for you. Turns out that's really good. And then she adds to your relentless plan by just chilling in the back. Really pretty crazy when you think about it. She's so good at one space. It's such a huge value. Tethys, eat your heart out. So, the other thing I'll mention here is that I think Little Fade, despite being, in my opinion, the strongest champion in the game by a lot, she's generally regarded as the hardest champion to play outside of Eternal Flame, right? These other two lines are really tricky, and it's because the power profile of Fade is very different. It's skewed towards the late game, and she's tragically weak early on. And reform density matters a lot, so you want to make sure you can bring her back whenever she dies. I have a lot of very unique behaviors with Fade that I think don't manifest in other champions. Things like I always look at her path first on the first ring before looking at the relic because her paths vary so wildly and I want to make sure that I pick a relic suitable for whatever I do. Some are actively bad for you, for instance, so you have to make sure you look at the relic second. I also will even remove train stewards as early as ring 2 because, again, reform density matters. And if you feel a little weak with Fade, just kicking out a couple train stewards can power you up quite a bit in a shocking way. So, and that's about as much as I need to say here, I think. I've already kind of gone a little longer than I wanted here. I do, again, like Umbra. Umbra had a lot of reasons where I had to justify why Umbra was the weakest clan. Here, I want to justify why Melting is the strongest clan. There's a lot of justification for that I think is relevant. So here we are, 32 minutes in, roughly 33. And yeah, the clan's nuts. The DLC really was a huge win for this clan. It feels so good to play. They are excellent. I love every aspect of them. And yeah, truly, though, if any clan does deserve it, like I mentioned for Dark Calling Rector, watch some YouTube videos of people playing before writing them off or saying they're weak. It's easy to play them, get demolished, and have no idea what you should have done because their lines are confusing. Before Wormkin was introduced, this was the most complex clan, and even today, it's by all metrics pretty tough to play. People lose with this a lot. So, give it the time of day, it's worth it. And yeah, that's all I've got for you. So, hey, thanks a lot for watching this. I really appreciate your time. As always, you can give the video a like or a dislike if you want. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And stay tuned for what's next. Take care, folks. You like that little pause there? Yeah, all right. Take care, folks.